All right, what is going on, everybody? Today we're going to be giving you a little bit of a history lesson into the Dodge Viper, as well as going over the evolution over the years from its inception as the '89 concept car all the way up to when it ended in 2017. So the Dodge Viper hit the automotive community by storm in 1989 as a concept car at the Detroit Auto Show. And when this car was unveiled, everybody wanted to know when it was going to go into production and how they can get their hands on it. Now, it took a couple of years after the concept car was unveiled to actually go into production, and the first Roadsters hit the streets in 1992, and that marks the first generation of Dodge Viper. So the Dodge Viper Gen 1 cars were produced from 1992 to 1995, and in 92 when it first came out, you could get it in any color you wanted as long as it was red. That's right, the only color for the Roadsters in 1992 was Viper Red. Now, in later years, they added other colors like black and emerald green, but predominantly your Gen 1 cars are gonna be red. Now, the Gen 1 car was an absolute beast and a totally different than anything else on the automotive market at the time. And the car came out with 400 horsepower and only had a 6-speed manual with an 8-liter V10, and it was truly unique. I mean, everything else in comparison, just there was no comparison. And so it was a huge success right out of the gate. And as a result, they went ahead and Dodge decided to see what they could do again and see if lightning would strike twice with the GTS Coupe. And so they came out with the concept of the GTS Coupe, and once again it took the automotive community by storm and everybody loved it. So of course the GTS Coupe project got greenlit and went into production in 1996. Now, the differences between the Gen 1 and Gen 2 cars are immense. Other than there were definitely some styling upgrades, the hood changed with the NASA duct and the vents, and then no longer did it have side pipes, it now had rear exit exhaust. The interior got a complete overhaul in 96 for the GTS Coupe, and the doors got roll-up windows in them and outside door handles. That's right, your Gen 1 cars have no windows on the sides other than these little flimsy plastic ones you can hang in there, and there were no outside door handles. So 1996, you definitely saw a huge jump in technology and capabilities with the Coupe. They also completely redesigned the suspension, and so they took some of the razor edge driving capabilities out that the RT10 had from the Gen 1 car, and it really took the car to the next level. Now, in 1996, not only did it mark the Gen 2 coupes and generation cars in general kicking off, there was also a transitional model that is known in the Viper community as the Gen 1.5 cars. Now, these cars are Roadsters from 1996 only, and they only saw some of the upgrades that the Gen 2 cars got. So it still had the Gen 1 power plant in it, but horsepower was increased from 400 horsepower to 415 horsepower because the exhaust system, instead of going out the side, was routed out the back. Now, these Gen 1.5 cars are very easily identifiable because they were only available in 3 color choices, and that paint scheme was only available in 96 for these Gen 1.5 RT10s. And those colors were white with blue stripes, black with silver stripes, and then red with yellow badges on the side of the hood, as well as yellow wheels. And so they're truly unique, very limited, as is a 1 year only. Now, 97 for the RT10 did not fully take on to the GTS platform with the Gen 2 car, and it's had a lot of the other upgrades were added to it, but it still wasn't having the Gen 2 hood with the NASA duct and the vents in the hood. That came in 98. So from 98 to 2002, you had a full Gen 2 complement with both the GTS Coupe as well as the RT10. As I mentioned, of course, the Gen 2 did start in 96 with the Coupe. So of course the Gen 2 also had the 8-liter V10 that the Gen 1 cars had, but there was, with a lot of modifications done to that engine, the power output was increased from 400 horsepower to 450 horsepower. Now, of course, throughout the years of the Gen 2, you did have a couple of special edition models. Probably most notably is going to be your 1998 GT2, which is white with blue racing stripes. It was to commemorate Viper's success in Le Mans racing. And then, of course, from there, you also had the ACR edition, which was introduced in 1999 and ran through the end of production for the Gen 2 cars in 2002. So the Gen 2 ACR Viper was definitely more geared towards the track enthusiast Viper owner. And they had lightweight BBS wheels on them, they had adjustable coilover suspension installed, and they had 5-point harnesses, all installed from the factory. And they also got an increase in horsepower from 450 horsepower to 460 horsepower with an improvement to the air filtration system, installing smooth tubes that go from the airbox to the throttle bodies. Now, of course, there were also a variety of other changes throughout the years for the Gen 2 cars. There were some changes to the interior. There were some additions of ABS brakes in 2001. And so it just continuously evolved as time progressed. And so if you're in the market for like a Gen 2 car and you want the most refined and have the most capabilities, you're gonna want one of the newer ones. So of course Dodge wasn't done with the Viper after the Gen 2, and they had a concept car called the GTSR concept that everybody loved. And this car was a total badass in design. It was really aggressive looking. And then unfortunately though, when the Gen 3 Viper came around, compared to that GTSR concept car, it was kind of anemic. The Gen 3 design, it did have an increase in horsepower over the Gen 2 cars once again. They also increased the displacement this time. And so they went from an 8-liter V10 to an 8.3-liter V10, and output of horsepower was increased from 450 to 500. But of course the styling was definitely lacking compared to the GTSR concept car that came out a couple of years prior. Now the Gen 3 cars, unfortunately in the Viper community, with all the cars that they had over the years, they're kind of reviewed as a bit of the redheaded stepchild. They were produced from 2003 through 2006, predominantly in roadsters. Coupes were added in 2006. But the reason why I say that this is the redheaded stepchild is after the Gen 3 car came the Gen 4 car, which in large part looked like the Gen 3, except the hood was changed with more aggressive vents, and then horsepower got a huge jump from 500 horsepower to 600 horsepower. And so as a result of having a slightly more anemic design compared to the Gen 4s, and just not as timeless of a design as the Gen 2s are in current market conditions, the Gen 3s are a really great bargain because they are still a great car, great performing car, but they're also tend to be a bit cheaper than your Gen 2s are getting at this point, and definitely cheaper than your Gen 4s or Gen 5s. So if you want to get into a Viper, you want it has a lot of refinements to it, but you don't want to be spending a ton of money, a Gen 3 is a good place to start. Now, of course, the Gen 3 also had, besides the exterior design change and the engine increase in power and displacement, the interior got a complete overhaul, of course, and then the brakes finally got a proper setup of 4-wheel, 4-piston calipers, whereas the Gen 2 cars only had, and Gen 1 cars only had, a 4-piston caliper on the front and a single piston cast iron unit on the back. So there's definitely a lot of refinements done for the Gen 3 cars, and they were only produced from 2003 to 2006. Now, 2007, no Vipers were produced. It was a transitional year, and so if anybody tells you they've seen a 2007 Viper, they're either pulling your leg or full of it, because there were no cars produced in 2007. So your Gen 4 Vipers debuted in 2008 and lasted until 2010. And there was, like I mentioned earlier, the 2008 saw an aggressive styling hood added, and then a huge increase in horsepower, going from 500 horsepower from the Gen 3 up to 600 horsepower in the Gen 4. And they also, of course, had some other refinements throughout the years. Like the Gen 3, it was available in both a convertible format as well as the coupe. But Dodge decided to bring back their ACR model. Now, the ACR for the Gen 4 Viper was definitely a lot more noticeable than the Gen 2 ACR was on the Viper. And that's because, in addition to seeing increase in suspension capabilities, you also saw a huge increase in aerodynamics, with having a front splitter, having a huge rear wing installed, and then front canards. And the car is an absolute track monster and definitely really geared to hitting the track. Now, unfortunately, 2010 saw the end of Viper production, and what everyone thought at the time was the end of the Viper altogether. And so the last Gen 4 Viper rolled off the assembly line in 2010, and it had a custom one-off paint scheme. and it is now in the Rao collection down in Texas. All right, so at the conclusion of 2010, with the end of the Gen 4 Viper, we all thought that that was the end of the Viper. And unbeknownst to us, Dodge had one more trick up their sleeve and was coming back out with the Dodge Viper again as the Gen 5 car, and this car was truly amazing. I, of course, saw all the development from all the previous generations Vipers and a bunch of new tech thrown at it. Now, the Gen 5 Vipers were produced from 2013 to 2017. And when they launched in 2013, they also saw an increase in horsepower over the Gen 4 cars, now producing 640 horsepower out of the V10. Once again, like all the other previous generation cars, you could only get it with a 6-speed manual transmission. And when they launched it, you had the option of either going with the base SRT model, which had a 6-vent hood, or the upgraded GTS model, which had a 2-vent hood. Now, of course, there were other differences between them, like the suspension as well as the interior. The GTS had a much more luxurious interior options with things like Laguna leather, and it was just an amazing car. Of course, this was also the first year for the Viper to have an infotainment system, and it also was the first for having stability control and traction control. And so there's a lot of stuff going into the Dodge Viper for the Gen 5 car that makes it truly special and an amazing machine. Now, throughout the production life of the Gen 5 Viper, there were several models and variations that came out, and it's hard to keep track of all of them. And so we're just going to scratch the surface here because they're just too many to capture in just one video. And so throughout the years, you could also upgrade to different track-oriented models. For starters, they came out with the TA model, which had a duckbill spoiler, and then from there they also went to the TA 2.0, which had a little more aggressive aero on it as well. And then in the final years of production, they had the ACR, which increased the aero even more, and the ACR-e, which really took the aero to a next level and was producing over 1,700 pounds of downforce at top speed. Now, of course, there were other upgrades throughout the models between the TA 2.0, the ACR, and the ACR Extreme, but the biggest differences are going to be your aero packages for this standard passerby. Now, the ACR and the ACR-e is definitely a bit of a challenge to tell the two apart. The wings are different on the back of them, but the easiest way to tell is the ACR Extreme has 2 cannons on the front on each side, where the ACR base only has 1, and then the ACR Extreme also has removable vents above the wheels on the front on the hood as well, where the base ACR does not. And so it's an amazing car. They also had, of course, increase in braking capabilities on the ACRs and ACR-es to going to a 6-piston front caliper, and it just is a track monster. Now, in addition to the track-focused ACRs, TAs, TA 2.0s, Dodge also offered their one-of-one program. Now, this was a truly unique program where the buyer could go and personalize all sorts of things on their Viper, mainly like the color options, and you get a special name plaque and all sorts of things like that. So it was a very cool program. You get to work with a concierge and go through and finalize all the steps and watch the build of your car. So it was a truly unique experience, and a friend of mine, Robert, got one done in a lime green color. He calls it the Snot Rocket. It's a pretty cool, unique car, and it was great to be there when he got it delivered to him at Norman and Chrysler. Now, of course, there are a handful of cars that were built as one-offs for as coach builders. The most prominent, of course, has to be the Medusa line, and these are convertible Gen 5 Vipers. Now, the Gen 5 Viper, unlike the previous years, did not come out with a convertible or a roadster from the factory. So if you see a Gen 5 Viper that has a removable target top or a drop top convertible, know that it wasn't from the factory, but from a coach builder, mainly Prefix, who did the painting of all the body panels on the cars. And since Prefix is known for doing all the painting for Dodge for all the Vipers, you can trust that the bodywork that was done to create these convertibles like the Medusa are definitely really solid, well done cars. All right, and that's today's overview of the history of the Dodge Viper from concept car in 1989 all the way to the final production of the ACR-e in 2017. I hope you found this video entertaining and useful as always. If you did, go ahead and smash that like button, give us a thumbs up. It helps us out with that YouTube algorithm. And in future videos, of course, we'll go further in depth into the history and the differences of the Vipers throughout the years, getting into color options and just other options and the unique features that changed as time progressed. And of course, if you're interested in the detailing equipment that I use or the vlogging equipment I use to make these videos, go ahead and click on the links in the description below. Doing so definitely helps me out with the YouTube channel and keeping things going. And if you want to be kept up to date of all the videos I do in the future, don't forget to smash that subscribe button down below and ring that notification bell as well, so that way YouTube will keep you up to date of all the videos I do in the future. And as always, guys, I will see you the next video.